This is the lens that people are calling the Oreo lens. It's the cheapest lens I've ever reviewed on this channel, and it's an all plastic lens, and it looks like something you'd get out of a McDonald's Happy Meal. And the image quality is almost the complete opposite of what viewers are looking for when they're watching lens reviews on YouTube. It's a 32mm fixed focus lens. That means it has no autofocus, it has no manual focus, it's just a set focus. And it has an f10 aperture, which also can't be changed because there's no aperture control. And the image quality is kind of a mix between cool character vintage lens and 1990s disposable film camera. But for the price you might pay for a halfway decent meal, you get a lens that is creatively liberating and a heck of a lot of fun to use. Now, just a word of warning, if you go on Amazon or eBay or Temu or whatever it is and you search for Oreo lens, you're actually going to find nothing because this is clearly not a licensed Oreo product, even though when you look at it next to an Oreo, you can tell it is clearly inspired by an Oreo. So I did find some specific links to where you can get it. I could only find it in 3 different mounts. I found it in Sony E, Fuji X, Canon RF, and Canon EFM, and I'll put those links in the description down below. If you have some other mount, I will put some budget alternatives. They don't look like an Oreo like this one, but they are going to get you very similar image quality. The first thing you'd have to ask is, why do I want this cheap plastic lens that costs around 20 bucks or something like that when I have much more expensive lenses? Well, I've got kind of 5 key reasons that I think you would actually want to buy and use a cheap lens like this. And the first one is, I think when you go out and you're taking photos with your good camera and a good lens, you got your G Master lens or your Sigma Prime or whatever it is, there is an expectation that you are going to take very good photos, hopefully better photos than you're taking with your phone or someone else is taking with their phone or a cheap camera. And sometimes it actually takes the joy out of photography, just having that pressure of having such good gear and thinking that you need results that are going to match the quality of your gear. Just going out with a cheap Happy Meal looking lens is really going to take that pressure off and just allow you to go around, take snapshots, have fun, just shoot random things, worry about composition, don't worry about composition, just have fun and lower your expectations because now you have basically restricted your camera or the quality of the photos you're going to get with this cheap lens. And I think it just makes a kind of fun running around point and shoot type experience. The other thing it's going to do for you, since you don't have to worry about focusing the lens or setting the aperture, those settings are just taken completely out of your hands. This is going to allow you to focus on the creative side of photography, framing, lighting, and often just being able to create a moving image or a compelling image with a cheap product like this that isn't a Sony G Master will make you more proud getting a good result with cheap gear than you will with more expensive gear. And I certainly find that myself, and that's why I use cheap gear on this channel all the time, even when I can afford more expensive gear. So I think using this lens is going to allow you to turn your focus to the creative side of photography and just try to get that image composition, framing, lighting, look, everything right, and just don't worry about autofocus, setting aperture, anything like that. The third thing I think it's going to do for you is this is an f10 lens and you can't change the aperture. F10 is a very small aperture, and as a fixed focus lens, it means everything from about 1 meter to infinity is in focus. So basically everything is in focus. You get a very deep depth of field. And because of this, you lose the ability to get a blurry background like you might with a Sigma Prime or something like this, or even a good quality zoom lens. And this is going to take that really easy default mode that you have with your better cameras out, which is just put something in the center of frame or on the rule of thirds, blur out the background, then you don't worry about the edges of frame, you don't worry about the background setup, you just blur it all out and you've got this nice little professional looking photo. I think everybody from amateur to professional photographers tend to rely on that at times. This is gonna take that away from you. So it's really gonna make you focus on your image composition, and it's gonna be a great training tool for your photography in general. Now, the other thing this lens is gonna do for you is gonna make your camera very small and light. And I actually weighed it, and this little Oreo lens weighs the exact weight as 2 real Oreos. In fact, it's actually 1 gram lighter. So we're talking about 17 grams or a half an ounce. That's how much the Oreo lens weighs. These two Oreos weigh more than the Oreo lens. So I don't know of any way to make your camera smaller and lighter. And beyond that, with some of the smaller cameras out there, it's going to take a camera that wasn't pocketable and turn it into an ultra portable, pocketable camera. The other reason I would use this lens is actually for its optical performance. It gives you a very nostalgic look. So it looks like something that's out of a vintage camera, a disposable film camera, an old VHS camera when you shoot video. But with the modern cameras now, there is enough room in editing that you can kind of make those images look almost however you want, but still keep kind of that nostalgic character or look that the lens gives you. So in a world where everybody's looking for sharper, more perfect images, sometimes the way to stand out or do something different and interesting is use the most imperfect lens possible. And I don't think they get quite more imperfect than this lens. And as I said before, it does look like something that's come out of a McDonald's Happy Meal. It is an all plastic lens. It doesn't even have a metal lens mount. It doesn't even have a place to put a lens cap on or a filter. In fact, this is what's considered a body cap lens, which just means you put it on your camera instead of a body cap, with the novelty being that it looks like an Oreo cookie. The lens does project an image circle that does cover a full frame sensor, but it's also very useful for APS-C. And all the examples you've seen in this video were shot on an APS-C sensor camera. And the only difference you're really going to see between the two is the APS-C images use the best part of the lens, so you're probably going to get a little bit sharper image. The lens does have an amount of pincushion distortion, which does go across the entire frame. Interesting note about pincushion distortion is it is known by photographers to make people look slimmer and be more flattering. So maybe that is an advantage of the Oreo lens, that you get everybody looking a little bit slimmer. One of the things that really gives the images out of this lens a lot of character is the very heavy vignette. Now, on full frame, it is crazy heavy, but even when you crop in and you're shooting on an APS-C sensor, it is still reasonably heavy. So either mode, you get a lot of vignette. And vignette or heavy vignette in photos really adds a specific look and draws the viewer's eye to what's more in the center of frame. And particularly when I'm shooting like moody shots or doing portraits, I will often use vignette to draw the viewer's eye to the center of frame. And in a situation where you've got a lens where basically everything's in focus and you don't have the ability to blur out the background, heavy vignette does allow you to create an image that draws the viewer's eye to something. So when you're composing the image, you really want to think about that vignette and actually how to use it to take better photos. As you would expect, the lens has quite a bit of chromatic aberration, particularly if you have backlit subjects. But actually, if you get black and white images in the center of frame, high contrast images, you really don't see a whole lot of purple fringing. I was quite surprised by that. But what you do get with backlit scenes is a purple outline around whatever dark object is backlit by the sun or a light source. Now, the flare performance on this thing is absolutely crazy. And depending on what you're after, it's either crazy good or crazy bad, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. And I think particularly for video, I've certainly seen big budget Hollywood movies where they've intentionally brought on crazy flare in different moody scenes. And this gives you this crazy, interesting flare, rainbow flare look. And you often see this out of old vintage lenses as well. So I think it's kind of fun, but really it depends on what you're after. And looking at close-up image quality, it is a fixed focus lens, so it's just focused at a certain distance, and you can't really get very close to your objects or they are out of focus. And I don't know exactly what the minimum focus is, but it's probably beyond 6 feet or something like that, because as you get reasonably close to any sort of object, it's all blurry and out of focus. When we look at sharpness, this is a really interesting one, because I don't expect the lens to be very sharp, and sometimes I take photos or videos and I go, yeah, that's kind of what I expect. But there are other situations where I'll see a subject in the frame and I go, wow, that is surprisingly sharp. Now, this is a phenomenon brought on by the fact that this is a fixed focus lens. And all fixed focus lenses are actually focusing at a specific point, whether you realize it or not. And because it's an f10 lens, it has a very deep depth of field. That means that things beyond the perfect focus point are at least still in focus enough that they look in focus to us. And the stuff before that is at least in focus enough that they look in focus to us. But there is a perfect point or a perfect distance from the camera where this lens will render the sharpest images. And I think sometimes when you accidentally hit that, you see something in the frame and you go, wow, that is surprisingly sharp. So your results will absolutely vary based on the distance the thing is from the subject, and it feels like a bit of a crapshoot, but it's not something I would worry about with a lens like this. It's just a fun kind of novelty lens anyways. And there's no use in talking about bokeh or background blur because this is a fixed focus lens and everything is effectively in focus. Now, ultimately I have to ask, do you really need a cheap plastic Oreo lens for your camera? Well, probably not, but it's so cheap and it's fun. Why not? This really could inspire you to just have fun with your camera more. Now, if you're interested in an ultra small lens that is autofocus, I've just thrown a video on screen now. At the time of release of that lens, it was only available on one mount, but I've just had word that there are 2 more to come. So you are going to be able to get an ultra small autofocus lens under $100 for a number of different lens mounts. If you haven't seen that video yet, I suggest you check it out.